I'm Jeff Case, originally from upstate New York, but I'm an Air Force brat, so I've lived kind of all over the place. This is my wife.
I'm Sarah Case. I was born in Northern California. I grew up there and spent my whole life in Northern California until I went off to college.
Yeah. So the furthest west I'd ever been in my life was Utah, and the furthest east that Sarah had lived was Utah. So we met at BYU, the first place that we could actually come together and meet. It's been an interesting process to kind of get to the point where you're willing to where I'm willing to sit in front of a camera and describe things about me that are very personal. Typically, I think we're very private people. We have a lot of friends, we're outgoing, we enjoy people, but the things that are really sacred to us, we kind of hold close to our chest, I think.
Yeah. It's been a couple-year process and things have come together, and we feel like it's time to share what is unique to us and where we can learn and grow ourselves and help others.
I think one of the main reasons why we came in, and this sort of started developing in my mind a few years ago after I read the Voices of Hope book. I should say that again. It was before I even read the book. A couple of years ago, as I was sitting in the temple and thinking about the law of consecration and how is it that we can dedicate ourselves to building up God's kingdom. Recognizing, because in my mind it's always been sort of tricky, like do we donate all of our excess income? Do we donate our excess crops? Like how are we living the law of consecration? And the wording in the temple ceremony kind of stuck in my head, just sort of a willingness to obey the law. And I thought, how willing am I to really consecrate what God has given me? And I think one of the things that sort of struck me at the time was that I am same-gender oriented, and I'm married in the temple, and I'm active in the church, and I have a strong testimony, and I don't have any major blips in my life. And I thought, well, that's so boring. A lot of the stories that I've read were so dramatic and filled with like big climaxes and deep valleys, and my life just feels so normal to me because I've been living it for many, many years. But I thought to myself, how is it that I can consecrate my story? I feel like God has the traits that I think He's given us. We're a fairly optimistic couple. I think we look at the bright side of life. We see the downside, we see the ugly parts of things, but I think our personality styles are much more optimistic and positive. So I grew up in the military, and that's always been my normal life. I was actually born while my father was in basic training for the Air Force. So my entire life has been spent moving around. Our first home really was in Spain, outside of Madrid, for 3 years, and I have some memories of that. And then living in Arkansas and Maine, Kansas. I graduated from high school in Italy. I think the biggest thing I draw from my experience through the military was the diversity of the world and seeing a lot of different perspectives and understanding the world from many different points of view. In Maine, the rural farmers and the outdoor woods kind of mentality that exists there, to high school in Naples, Italy, very cosmopolitan and fast-moving, fast-paced. You see the world through different lenses and different eyes, and I think that informs my world, that I can take perspective and recognize and appreciate many different ways of looking at the same problem.
He has an amazing family. They've
That's
always
true.
been very supportive and always been very together. All of our families have issues. Everybody's family has issues, but
I think
very loving.
Yeah, and I think like when you move around a lot, you do rely on your siblings. So my parents are still married. They got married in 1970, so it's been 44 years. Today is actually my dad's birthday, 68 years old. Great parents, very loving. They taught me a lot about unconditional love because they basically love everybody on the planet. I don't think they've ever been upset with people. They'd love unconditionally. And that's sort of the hallmark of my siblings as well. There are 6 of us in my family, 6 kids. I am the second of 6, 3 boys, 3 girls. And the thing that I draw from my siblings again is love. If I feel down and I need to be picked up, I can talk to any of my siblings and they love and they embrace and they accept wholly. And that again informs me about Christ-like love when I look at my family. So the same gender attraction, this was a thing that never got talked about, especially in the places where I lived. On highly conservative, hyper-masculine military culture, there was no such thing as being gay. There was no such thing as being attracted to the same sex. In the 70s and the 80s when I was being brought up, it wasn't a thing that was really talked about in the mainstream world. Certainly not where I lived. There was sort of an awareness of it. I think I knew about gay rights a bit, but there weren't jokes. People weren't joking about being gay. So honestly, I felt kind of different, but I didn't have a word for it. I knew that on the playground, I wasn't like other boys. I didn't have the athletic skills. I tried, but usually failed. I didn't connect well with other guys. It was easier to be friends with the girls. I felt less threatened. But at the same time, I was drawn, and I kept being drawn. And I think the first time I really felt a crush on a guy was in high school, but I didn't have a word for it. I felt like I really want to be his friend, but I didn't know how to talk to him because I felt nervous and clammy, and I'd get all ooh. And so I just kept my distance and just noticing from afar, but I didn't have a word for it. I didn't know how to describe what I was feeling.
I grew up in California. It was a little more prevalent there. I had a few friends in high school, and it was, I think it was probably more talked about in my life than it was in his. And some close friends that were gay, and I was accepting, and I didn't understand it at all. I didn't, it wasn't my experience, so I didn't understand what they were living, but it was their choice, and that was a lot of my worldview was I'm going to make the choices that are right for me and try not to judge you for yours. And so it was definitely something that was around me and was talked about, but I didn't have an understanding at all.
It started to be, I kind of describe my high school years as sort of like a latency period. I had some experiences when I was younger with the same sex, but kind of the childhood play, nothing that I would take too seriously. I could kind of couch as sort of young experimentation. In high school, the attempts to dating were pretty awkward and clumsy. Any of my ex-girlfriends that are watching this, I'm so sorry. I did not know what I was doing. But that became quite clear usually after a month or two, and things kind of fizzled. I was a great friend. I could be a great friend, and I knew how to do that. I didn't know how to be romantic. That was part of the confusion. But other guys seemed to have no problem with the romance part. They didn't know how to be friends with their girlfriends, and that's what usually broke them up. I could be great friends, and I'm nice, and they're like, oh, Jeff, you're so nice, but we're not going to date anymore. And I couldn't figure that out because there wasn't that natural draw, that thing that I think people who are opposite gender oriented kind of have that natural draw towards the opposite sex, that understanding. So I found myself kind of coming out of that latency period by the end of my senior year. It became more clear. This was in 1991, 92. I became kind of aware of my own sexuality, and I could start to put words to it. But again, it was sort of a distant thing. So I found myself at 18 on a Greyhound bus traveling across West Texas. I spent many, many hours, and I'd been on the bus for about 4 hours when we stopped some small town, and the kid got on, sat next to me. And I felt that draw. I felt that, ooh. Again, I didn't know what it was, but I felt nervous, in my stomach. And then he started talking to me, and I kind of felt flattered that he was talking to me. Again, it's kind of another clue, but I was pretty clueless still. And he pulled out a necklace and said, hey, do you know what this means? And I'm like, no, what is it? And it had the spectrum colors and beads on the necklace. I'm like, oh, it looks nice. And he put it away quickly and said, oh, never mind. And I'm like, well, now you got to tell me, because you can't just show me something and then not tell me. He's like, no, it's no big deal. I'm like, well, are you part of a cult? I mean, what is this? And so I started pressing him. I wanted to know what this charm meant. And he said, well, it means that I'm gay, and I thought you were too. And I was pretty dumbstruck, because that was the first time anyone had ever said to me, I thought you were gay. And I knew that word, but I'd never applied it to myself. And so what that did, in that minute, I think of panic, it solidified all these childhood memories and experiences. It sort of created a basis of understanding myself in a different way that I'd never even considered before. And I was pretty panicky. I didn't know what to say. He took that as sort of a homophobic reaction, and he was like, well, this is why I didn't want to tell you, because I knew that you'd freak out. He didn't know why I was freaking out. And I quickly assured him, and then I just do what I do best, and I asked him questions and let him talk about his life. While inside my head, I was kind of panicking. But all of a sudden, all of these things, the attractions now, I could call them attractions. They were crushes. I wasn't drawn towards guys. I thought they were cute. And I'd never said that before. And so all of these random memories kind of came together in one cohesive picture in my mind. I'm gay. But there was a problem with that because I knew instinctively you couldn't be gay and Mormon at the same time. I had just received my mission call. I was supposed to go to the MTC within a month or two of this conversation, and I didn't know what to do with this new piece of information. And I was kind of in a panic mode. So I did what I do. my other tactic, apart from diverting tension away from me, I locked things up in boxes and put it in the back of my head. And I didn't have a way of dealing with this. There was no discussion in '93 about homosexuality in the church. Anything that was mentioned was sort of the heavy-handed approach from the 60s and 70s that I could come across, but nothing that helped me understand that I could be in the church and be attracted to the same sex. And so I panicked again, locked it up in a tight box, put it in the back of my head, and let it live there for a while. Met up with my family, went to the MTC, and tried to keep things together. I entered the MTC in '93, summer of '93. This was the first of many points that I had options to leave the church. The MTC was a very difficult place for me. I had a hard time adapting. I'm kind of a free spirit, and there's a lot of rules to be followed that I find I tend to kick against rules that I think are stupid. And so I found myself kicking a lot and not feeling very supported. But I stuck with it, went to South Florida for my mission, and served for 2 years. Again, kind of keeping these things in the back of my head. They resurfaced a few times. I think there were natural times where I was attracted to a companion. But at that point, I understood, from my perspective at 19 or 20, what I tried to do when I felt that attraction was just get to know the person better. I kept it as I want to be his friend. He seems like an interesting person, a nice guy, so I want to be his friend. And so if I felt that attraction to a companion, I just used that as an impetus to really become friends and find out about them and understand them better, which I think people do when they want to start dating. They find out about each other. And usually by finding out about my companion and becoming friends, we became friends. That was the direction that I was focused on, and that's what usually happened. And the attractions went away, which I thought was interesting. I didn't know what that meant at the time, but I thought it was interesting. And I would use that many times throughout my early 20s when I felt that attraction. I used it to kind of become friends, and I found out, lo and behold, all of a sudden I could have guy friends. And it was kind of the first time that I really felt close to guys. And it was nice. And so I began to use that attraction that I had to keep a secret to move me towards friendship. And it kind of gave me some insight into this whole same gender orientation stuff. What I got from my mission, though, really was a strong testimony of the gospel of Jesus Christ, the plan of salvation. This is sort of how I understand the world, is through the restored gospel of Jesus Christ. And understanding that I'm not just a creature of this world, that I existed before I was born. I have this life, and the purpose of this life has been clear to me. There are scriptures that I fall back on a lot to understand why I'm here and what it's all about. And so when I have trials and difficulties, I can see things from the perspective of before, now, and after, and put that in relationship to that whole picture.
We met the first day of class after his mission. I came in as a sophomore, and he came in as a sophomore after his mission. In our very first class, Tuesday morning, we met, sat right behind him, and we talked. I saw him. I thought, that guy should ask me out. He didn't do that. But we got to know each other through the multiple classes that we had together. We got to know each other really well.
Yeah, we were in the same major.
We were taking classes together, getting to know each other, hanging out a lot. And one of the first things for me, and within a few months, I knew that I could marry a guy just like Jeff. I didn't necessarily have a crush on him, but I loved his sense of humor. I loved his intellect. I loved how kind he was and generous and accepting of everyone and friends to everyone, and his testimony. There were so many things that I wanted in my husband, that I knew I could marry a guy just like Jeff, that he's a great person, and I didn't have a crush on him at that point, but I knew I could marry someone just like him, because of how kind and sweet he is, and his talents and caring and sensitivity and just all these things that I was learning about him in the first few months that we were hanging out together.
Well, it was one of the easiest friendships I've ever had. It was just easy. I mean, I didn't feel awkward saying, let's go study. It wasn't like, of course we're going to go study. Who else would I study with besides Sarah? And of course we're going to be friends. We'd see each other like way down the hall across campus or whatever. Sarah Bender, Jeff Case. It was so easy to just be close, to be vulnerable.
Yeah. We very quickly became close friends. Things did not ever really evolve. We were best friends, and we hung out all the time, and we spent so much time together, and I had a crush on him. We were dating other people. He was dating other people. We were hanging out still because we were best friends, and they never really evolved until one day we just decided that we are so close and we are so good for each other. We should just get married. let's just do that.
So I realized something about 6 months before we became romantically involved. And I was dating a girl at the time, not a girl, I was dating another student, a woman, a young woman, and something had happened, and it fractured my relationship with Sarah. And I remember feeling devastated that I might lose Sarah as a friend. And I was willing to end things with my girlfriend for the sake of my best friend. And something clicked in my mind that I can't live without Sarah as my close friend. I couldn't do that. It was devastating. And it solidified in me how much Sarah means to me, and that it matters to me that she's in my life. So it wasn't romantic yet, but I knew on like a life or death scale that I needed to have her in my life, because seeing her upset was far more devastating than anything I'd experienced. And I needed to never devastate her again. But that informed me. Again, this is all information you take in, that I took in to kind of understand, the importance of this relationship. But of course, we were just friends. So Sarah made the decision to go on a mission and started her paperwork.
Started my paperwork. I had my interviews. I was progressing and had made all my decisions. And I remember my dad, I talked to him after one of my interviews, and he said, well, did you tell him about Jeff? I was like, what am I supposed to tell him about Jeff? That this guy, he doesn't like me? We're friends, but he doesn't like me back. I'm supposed to tell my bishop that? And he's like, I think you should have told him about Jeff. I'm like, I don't know what I'm supposed to say to Jeff about that. I don't know what I'm supposed to express about this guy who we're great friends, but he doesn't like me back. And so I kept heading toward the mission, and I loved Jeff dearly, and he was probably one of my very, very closest friends. And I knew I'd see him after the mission. I knew I'd see him, we'd hang out again,
But I also knew that I felt as her mission got closer and this stuff was happening, I felt very cowardly if I didn't say anything, because I was starting to feel something. I knew that if we ever dated, we'd get married, was kind of how I felt. And I knew that there was no point in between best friends and being married, but I wasn't ready to be married, I don't think. I wasn't courageous enough to accept that level of commitment. So what I needed at that time was strength. And I remember sitting in the library, we were studying normal daytime, and I looked up from the books, and Sarah had her hand in her hair. Do you want to recreate that? It's a fly in your hair. But we were sitting there in the library, and I look up, and she was kind of playing with her hair, and it was long and very blonde, and the light caught it just right, and I just remember being like mesmerized. And that was the first time I thought, she's really beautiful. And then I noticed the color of her eyes, the blue, and she only ever wore simple makeup, just mascara, but that mascara made her eyes so intensely blue. And I thought, she's really beautiful. And then I sat with that for a minute, and I got nervous, Because if I recognize her as being beautiful, does that mean that I'm attracted to her? Does that mean that there might be romance here? And if it did, that means I'm supposed to get married. And that was such a big leap that, again, it took me several weeks more to figure out how to make this happen. Because everything that I'd done with girls before was so disastrous, so awkward, so clumsy. I don't know how anybody liked me. So I knew that if she would go on a mission, that would be my easy out. That would be the cowardly way. I could just let her go and then not have to decide. But I needed to decide. I didn't want to be cowardly. I wanted to be courageous. And so I went to the temple one day and found my courage. And we sat in the car on the way to my sister's house for Easter. And I grabbed her hand and we started holding hands. And Sarah said, what is this?
I know. I said, we've been best friends for 2 years. We've got to define exactly what's going on right now. I need to know exactly what this is. And he said, well, I think we can date exclusively. And I said, oh, that's a good plan. I mean, I've loved him for 2 years as a person, and I was attracted to him. And I said, that's great. Let's date exclusively. And he said, and we should start temple prep classes and head towards a temple. And I'm like, and we're going to get married. Yeah, I'm good with that.
Again, it was just so easy. And this has been the hallmark of our relationship. Everything has been easy. Mm-hmm. It's been...
Our friendship was such that it was a natural progression. That we were so close and we loved each other so much that the next step was to decide for the rest of eternity to be together.
Yeah. And I was still freaked out by that a little bit.
We all are a little freaked out about that.
But we sat there and it just felt easy. It felt easy that night to pull out our calendars and find the wedding date and circle it and pray about it and to feel so happy and so good. And it was, again, just so easy. We came back to school from that weekend and told people that we were dating. We thought, let's not tell people we're engaged because that's one step too far, even for BYU. We didn't want to be that couple, right?
So we dated.
So we dated for a month.
A month or so. As we were planning the wedding.
But everyone assumed that we already were dating. Like, I thought you guys were already girlfriend.
Nobody was really surprised.
No.
Well, and we said, okay, we're getting married. And they're like,
of course you are.
Duh.
When can we come?
Right.
So, and I think honestly for us, like when the romantic relationship developed out of the friendship. So for us, our foundation has always been friendship. And I find with my childhood very easy to be friends with females. It made it easy to be friends with my wife first. And so the romance came up out of that. So our sexual intimacy developed as an offshoot of our friendship and the love that we have on an intellectual level, a spiritual level. I think intimacy is understood from a lot of different angles, and we had intimacy first and romance second, which I think has been helpful for us because romance comes and goes, especially as we get older. The romance comes and goes, but it's always founded on this relationship that, we forged our fires as friends. When you fight as friends, you're like, oh, whatever, I'll call you in a week, and there's no weirdness. When you're fighting as a boyfriend, girlfriend, there's weirdness. We didn't have that. We got our fights out of the way in those first couple of years. So back to that topic. So because it wasn't discussed, I thought that if you just get married, it would all go away. And this is what I love about this project is that we're talking about it and we don't have to make up theories I don't have to rely on the theories that I make up in my head because I make up all sorts of theories that may or may not be true. And one of them was being attracted to men was a passing phase. It was a small thing, no big deal. It didn't really matter that much. I just needed to do what was right and it would all be made right. I just needed to have sex with a woman and then that would make it so that's all I would ever want. So imagine my surprise when that wasn't the case. In fact, by becoming sexually active after we got married, it opened up that box, that box labeled Jeff's sexuality that lived in the back of my head. It opened it up. And I became horrified. And it was very difficult. I thought that I had ruined lots of things. So to be clear, I did not tell Sarah before we were married that I was same-gender oriented. There were a few opportunities where it came up or it could have come up. And again, I showed I was just unafraid. I was just very afraid. I didn't know how to say it. I didn't know the words. There wasn't a language to describe what I was feeling. Because I knew I was committed to the gospel, and I knew I was committed to her. And this piece didn't have a place for those two realities. Who could I look to? I mean, people we suspected, I guess, and I'd heard rumor of a professor being married and in the high council, but no one that we knew to set an example that this could actually work. And that was kind of terrifying. There's no precedent. We felt, or at least in my heart, I can't say we because she didn't even know yet, but in my heart, I felt like I was the only person in the world doing this.
Late one night, just laying in bed, talking, I had my head on his chest and his heart started to race. It was all of a sudden just pitter patter so fast. I'm like, what is going on? And he's like, well, I'm like, what is in your mind right now? And he's like, I have something to talk to you about. And I remember holding tighter and just saying, there's nothing that you can say. I mean, what could make you so nervous?
And I was nervous. I decided earlier that day that we needed to talk. That even though our sex life was good, very robust for newlyweds, that this thing that I was hiding was becoming quite cancerous and it was just gnawing at me. And so I needed to tell her. And so I decided to do it that day, and it took until 1:00 in the morning to finally muster up the courage, but it was very frightening. And I told her that I was attracted to men and that I thought I might be gay. I don't think I used that word, though.
I think you said same-sex attraction.
Did I? Mm-hmm. Possibly.
I think you did.
Did I?
Because I remember going, oh. Okay, well, I said, what does that mean? What do you mean? Why tell me now? Why didn't you tell me before? What does that mean? Are you leaving me? And he's like, no, but you can leave me. And
that's why we wear waterproof masks.
Right? I married Jeff because I love him. I married Jeff because he's kind and generous and sweet and funny and sarcastic. And finding out his sexual orientation didn't change how funny and sweet and kind and loving. Didn't change his testimony. It didn't change all these things that I loved him for and married him for. It only changed my understanding, and it only changed a little bit of my worldview. He did brush it all away very quickly though that night. He said, "Oh, and it's getting better. We're fine. It's gonna go away still. We're maybe very quickly."
So I touched the fire and withdrew my hand quickly. That was the approach of things. When you don't know the answers, why get into it? And so I think over the next year and a half, especially, we started to understand and make sense of what this means. So we have this picture of the gospel painted in our minds. And when information comes in, we have to make sense of it somehow based on the picture that we already have. And we can change the picture to fit the new information, or we can change the information to fit the pre-existing picture. And I think what the task of my last 20 years, or our last 20 years really, has been to understand what this means and how this matters, and understand it from a perspective. But finally, being able to say it out loud was so impactful and so freeing. And when you shine light on something and talk about it, you see it for what it is and not for what it pretends to be. In our minds, things pretend to be so critical, and we can build up anything we want to believe. And it doesn't have to be grounded on reality, because it's our minds, and our minds work that way. It's kind of funny. And then when you say it out loud and you shine light, I see it from a different perspective, and I understand it differently. So this was the first of many occasions that I had to follow up the inspiration of marrying Sarah. The inspiration I received that this was the most important decision I could make was marrying her, deciding to marry her. And that confirmation that I received the night that we decided to get married has been reinforced so many times, but the quality of woman that she is, that she could take this and understand that it's not about her, that this was not an indictment on her as a woman, that this was my issue.
I had to very quickly understand that it doesn't make me less of a woman. It doesn't make me any less beautiful. It doesn't make me any less attractive. It doesn't make me any less of a person that he chose to live our lives together, that it made me value that he loved me as a person more. It made me value that, honestly, my looks and my femininity really had nothing to do with why he married me. It was all personality. It was all our relationship and our friendship. And as we learned and grew to understand this together, and what it meant for our relationship and how it lives within our relationship, it helped. It grew us. It brought us. Good one. It brought us closer. It strengthened our relationship. I think we grew to love each other more by understanding each other more and seeing each other on a deeper level, even.
Yeah, and this is the crux of intimacy. In our marriage, the better I know her and the better she knows me, the more intimate we can be. It's really about knowing somebody and being known by somebody. And then when you know the deepest parts, or when I knew the deepest parts of Sarah, and Sarah knew the deepest parts of me, and our love only grew stronger, that informed me. That was really important for me to understand how relationships work. But honestly, I think what really sets apart casual relationships from deep relationships is that intimacy, how well you're known, and not knowing the pretty parts, but the ugly parts, the how I look in the morning before I've done my hair. That's important to be accepted for all the ugly parts about a person as well as the beautiful parts. And for me, this was an ugly part, and I'll clarify that that's not anymore how I view the same gender orientation. It's not an ugly part of me anymore. It's beautiful and fantastic, and 10% fabulous. So we've been married for 17 years now. We have 3 children, and I find it to be the greatest blessing in my life to be married to my best friend, to be raising our biological children in an intact home. They have their mother, they have their father, and my testimony of families is so strengthened by having a family. I get it. I didn't get it before I was married. I didn't get it before I had kids. This is the kind of information that one can only get through experience. And our experience has been wonderful. And to this day, the best time of my day is when I get to drive home after work. And I love my job. I love what I do outside the home. But the happiest I am every single day, and I get in my car to head home, and I get excited. Because no matter what's happened, no matter who's beat me up that day, no matter the things that have happened, I get to go home to a safe place where I am loved and accepted for who I am. And I knew that from Sarah, from these early experiences. And then my kids are just amazing. Kids love us no matter how bad we are as adults. They love us, and it's a wonderful thing.
I think that in every marriage, in our marriage, there's opposition, and I think that we learn and grow from these things that we experience in our lives. And this choice at that 6-month mark, we could have ended everything and gone our separate ways and really not been too worse for the wear. But the choice to grow closer and to follow our hearts for what our testimonies are, that we know that the gospel brings us joy, and that as we chose to follow our Savior and honor our temple covenants and stay married, it has brought unexplainable joy to us. This choice, I think people think that Jeff is suffering through his life, that this is such a sacrifice. And it is a sacrifice, but it's a sacrifice that has brought our family joy, that has brought our children joy, that has brought me so much happiness, that we can honor our covenants together and live our lives to find that happiness together.
Yeah, it's interesting because I look at the sacrifice that I'm making, and I'm not sure what great sacrifice I'm making, to be quite honest. Because this is what I have going for me. I have my best friend as my life partner, my eternal companion, right? That's pretty amazing. And my strongest cheerleader and my biggest advocate and the one who's always in my corner no matter how stupid I am sometimes. Okay, I get to raise my children with their mother in an intact home. I have fellowship in the gospel that I never imagined I would have. Such great friends, people who know me, people who know that I'm same-gender oriented in the church, who love me for who I am. All I've received back by telling my story is acceptance and love. There are men that love me deeply and men that I love deeply, that I love on a very deep level. People that I have an association with this great organization, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, which does so much good in the world, and I get to be a part of it. I enjoy a wonderful professional life that comes from my sensitivity, my intellect, whatever, all these nice things that she said about me, that help me out with what I have professionally, and I have great contacts that way. And the only thing that I don't really have, I suppose, is a romantic relationship with a man. But it's not that I don't get to be loved by men and love men deeply. Really, all I'm missing is that sexual component with another male. And if that's all, that's not. I understand myself not just in the realm or the eyes of a sexual person. I'm not just a sexual being. That I'm an eternal son of God. I was before I was born, and I will be a son of God for eternity. And the sexuality part of me serves a great purpose in this life, and I get to express that in, I think, a very honest and sincere way with my wife, because that came from our friendship. And the romance part, I did have to learn. Right? I had to learn what gestures to make on the romantic thing that I think other guys may more instinctively.
He had to learn the romantic side, but he has always been more sensitive than any guy I've ever dated. He always has understood me better, and I think that is a trait that he might not have if things were different.
Yeah. So from this same gender orientation, I think there's a personality style that kind of goes along with it, that the more sensitive, caring, nurturing, and I think Sarah enjoys that. Right?
I do. I enjoy that he is more sensitive to my needs, and he is very aware of me as a person. And with the guys that I dated before, they wouldn't always understand my emotions, and I think Jeff understands those better than anyone ever has.
So I've got this thing, right? This same gender orientation. I've got to figure out where it came from, why I have it. It's not a disorder that I have. It's something that I spent years trying to figure out. Am I born this way? Is it a genetic thing? Is it the brain structure that they were doing in the 90s? Where's that gene, the gay gene? Was it the hormones that pass in vitro? I don't know. None of that really helped me out understand. All I know is that this is who I am today. And what do I have that God has given me, and how am I using that? And this goes back into the law of consecration. I have what I have, and am I using it to strengthen my own family? Am I using it to contribute to building up God's kingdom on the earth? And the time that I've been in church leadership, I think I have. The time that I spent as elders quorum president in 2 different wards, that care and love of man served me quite well. And I used it in a way to make men feel comfortable, to be comfortable around them. But I use those traits to nurture and to build up God's kingdom. So we have what we have, but how are we using what we have? And I think ultimately that's what we're going to be accountable for. How do we use what we have, and how do we understand it? So looking at it from, again, the canvas of the gospel, how does this make sense within the gospel? And the scriptures that come to mind are things like, I love in the book of Hebrews where it talks about faith, but at the end of chapter 11, it talks about without our suffering, we cannot be made perfect. We cannot be made completed or whole. This is a part of who I am, and I have this with me as part of my eternal progression to make me whole and also to make my family what it is. And from that perspective, it sort of makes sense. And other people choose to look at the same issue from a different perspective in their own canvas. And they have to and it has to make sense for them. But this is just how it makes sense for me. That I look at my sexuality through my spiritual eyes. What is the function of my sexuality based on my spiritual eyes? And that's what keeps me where I'm at. That's what keeps me going to the temple. There are things that I just can't shake. I can't shake my testimony of the Book of Mormon because I know how I feel when I read it, and I know how I am when I live the principles that are taught there. I know how I am when I follow the teachings of Christ found in the New Testament, the Old Testament. These things enrich my life and make me better. And that's the kind of experience that people can't argue with me about the choices that I've made, and they can do that all day long. It doesn't matter because my experience is mine, and that data can't be refuted. I think the piece, again, people who know me always describe me as happy. People who know us describe us as happy. People identify our marriage as strong. And I think it's because it's authentically happy and authentically strong. We're not faking this. You can't make this crap up. All right. I think that the message that I would like to get out there that we want to really portray, and this is why we're participating in the Voices of Hope project, to give that example for people who don't know that this can work and work in a deep, meaningful, authentic way. I'm being true to myself and I'm being true to my family. And sure, there are sacrifices, but man, the blessings I get from these sacrifices, it's indescribable.
As we make the choices that are congruent with the gospel, I feel my Savior's love, and I feel him bless me in every aspect. And I think this relationship is a huge blessing, that I do get to spend eternity with my best friend. And it's a little different and it's a little unique, but it works for us.
So I'd like to just say that in every marriage you have to work on something. And I think if you're heterosexual, if you're opposite gender oriented, the romance might come easy, but you have to work at the friendship. In the case of people like me that are same gender oriented, I had to work on the romance part, but the friendship came easy. I want to say that you have to work on something. And there's no such thing as an easy marriage. There's no such thing as it just sort of, without struggle, without fight. You have to work on something. And this is the thing that I've had to work on. And by doing so, with the understanding that we have of where we're headed, we have a beautiful thing, and it's authentic and it's real, and it's great.